Welcome to the second of 4 videos on Microsoft Access. In the first video, I demonstrated how to create a new database and introduce the objects that you'll find in an Access database. These objects are tables, forms, queries, and reports. When creating a database, you start by defining one or more tables to hold the data of your application. Next, you might create forms for entering and viewing the data in the tables. Then you might create some queries in order to retrieve data from the tables according to certain criteria. And finally, you might create some reports to format and present the data from the queries, or maybe even directly from the tables. Well, this video is all about tables. No, not that kind of table. Yes, tables of data. Microsoft Access is a relational database. In a relational database, data is stored in tables. A table organizes data into rows and columns. The rows in a table are called records. A record holds information on one thing, be it a person, maybe a product, event, transaction. There's lots of different things that you might hold data on. The columns of a table are called fields. A field has a specific data type. For example, you can see that album ID has a data type of number, and album title has a data type of string. For each column, there's a data value for each row or record in the table. Let's create some tables in our cookie sales database. As I warned earlier, creating a database takes a little more forethought than creating a Word or Excel document. With Word or Excel, you can generally jump right in and iterate your way to a finished product. With Access, a little more upfront design work is needed. Database design is beyond the scope of this video, so I'm going to just present the design for our cookie sales database. Our database will have 3 tables: customers, orders, and order detail. For each customer, we're going to store the first name, last name, and phone number. There's also a special field called Customer ID, which in database terminology is called a primary key. The sole purpose of this field is to uniquely identify customer records. Each record in the customer table will have a unique value for the Customer ID field. And notice that all tables have a primary key field. Primary key is an important concept in database design. I suspect you're already familiar with the concept though. When you call up your credit card company, what's the first thing they ask you? What is your credit card number? When you call the school to inquire about your account, they'll ask, what's your student number? If you call the Department of Motor Vehicles, they'll ask, what's your license number? In all cases, these numbers are being used as primary keys in some database. Whenever someone asks you for your credit card number, social security number, student number, etc., they're asking because they need the primary key in order to access the record that they have for you in their database. So, a primary key is a database field used to uniquely identify each record in a table. Can you handle one more big idea? Well, here goes. Primary keys are not only used to uniquely identify records in a table, they're also used to connect records from one table to another. For example, notice that the orders table has a field for customer ID. This allows us to trace an order back to a particular customer, or go the other way too. That is, given a customer ID, we can find all orders for that customer. I'm going to create these 3 tables in Microsoft Access now. To create a table, go to the Create tab and select Table Design. Here we're going to specify the name and data type of each field in our customer table. The first field is Customer ID, and the data type is auto number. Auto number means that Access will automatically assign a unique number each time we enter a new record. We decided this field would be primary key, so I'm going to select the primary key icon on the Design tab. Or maybe I'm not going to select it. I noticed this earlier when I was practicing. For some reason, the icon is grayed out, and frankly, I'm not sure why. The only explanation I have is that it's a bug in the software. I'm not positive about that, so for now I'm just going to call it odd behavior. Nevertheless, I did find a workaround. I noticed if you right-click to the left of the field, the primary key icon for some reason just becomes active. And actually, if you want, you can choose primary key from the right-click menu. And so whatever option you choose, though, make sure that you see the key icon next to the field. This indicates this field has been designated as a primary key. The next field is first name, and its data type is short text. Notice short text is 255 characters, and that should be enough for any name. I'll also enter last name and phone number, both as text fields. You might think phone numbers as numeric, but I'm going to make it text to allow for dashes and parentheses. I'm going to close the table now. It's asking if I want to save the changes I made. I'll click definitely. Now it's asking me for a name. This is the customers table, so I'm going to enter that name here. There, we have one down and now two more tables to go. I'm going to define the orders table now. So I'll go to create table design. Order ID is auto number and a primary key. Customer ID is of type number. It's a foreign key, but there's nothing I need to do special here. There isn't a special foreign key icon comparable to the primary key icon that we used earlier. The field is a foreign key by virtue of how it's used. We'll use this field to connect order records to customer records. In database terminology, we call this field a foreign key because it's going to hold a value that's a primary key in another table. The next field is seller name, and it'll be text. And I have a confession to make. This isn't really good database design. I'm simplifying here for sure. We should have a separate table for sellers and connect sellers here via foreign key like we did for customers. However, I want to keep this example simple, so I'm going to just enter seller's name as text. The next field is order date. I'm going to define it as a date time with a format of short date. And note, this is the first field we define that had a format subtype. You can use the format attribute to further qualify the data type of a field. I'm going to close this table now and give it the name of orders. There's one more table to define, and that is order detail. You can think of order detail records as being the individual lines on an order. For example, a customer might place an order for a box of Thin Mints and a box of Tagalongs. In this case, there would be one record for the customer, one record for the order, and two records in the order detail table, one for the Thin Mints and one for the Tagalongs. You're familiar with how to define a table, so I'm going to speed through the definition of the order detail table. There, we have three tables now. As I mentioned before, primary keys and foreign keys are used to connect records from one table with records in another table. For example, the customer ID field in orders is used to connect customer records with order records. Order ID is used to connect order records with order detail records. Right now, these relationships are implicit, but Access allows us to make the relationships explicit. And if we do make them explicit, it'll make working with the database a lot easier. How important is the concept of relations between tables? That is, this primary key, foreign key kind of relationship between tables? Well, Microsoft Access is a relational database, and they wouldn't call it a relational database if relations weren't somehow essential to the functioning of the database. To define relationships between tables, go to the Database Tools tab and select Relations. If this dialog box doesn't show automatically, select Show Table. In the dialog box, select the tables or queries that you want to define relationships between. Be sure to add each table only once. If you do make a mistake, though, you can always clear the layout and show the table dialog box again. I'm going to add the 3 tables we just defined. You may want to reposition the tables on the screen to make the relationships easier to visualize. To define the relationship between the customer table and the orders table, click on the customer ID field in the customers table and drag and drop it on the customer ID in the orders table. I'm going to select Reinforce Referential Integrity. By selecting this, Access won't allow me to do things that don't make sense. For example, if I select this, Access won't allow me to delete a customer record that has an existing order record. Notice the relationship is one-to-many. This means one customer can have multiple orders, but each order is associated with one and only one customer. If you think about it, that fits the real-world semantics of our application data. Next, I'll add a relationship between orders and order detail. Again, I'll do it by clicking and dragging order ID in orders and dropping it on order ID in order detail. Again, I'm going to elect Enforce Referential Integrity. Once you've defined the relationships, select Close to exit out of the Relationships Design mode. If Access asks if you want to save your changes, be sure to select Yes. Now that we've defined 3 tables and the relationships between these tables, let's enter some data. We don't have any forms defined yet, so I'm going to enter data directly into the tables. Let's pretend that the customer Joe Johnson just placed an order for a box of Thin Mints and a box of Do-si-dos. Joe is a new customer, so we first need to enter a customer record. To enter a customer record, I'm going to double-click the customer table to open it. You can see the field names here at the top. I'm going to enter Joe's name and phone number. Well, there's one record. I'll close the table now. Notice that Access didn't ask if I wanted to save my changes. And if you notice up in the left-hand corner, the disk icon is grayed out, which indicates there's no new changes that need saving. You don't have to tell Access to save your data. The data you enter into your database is saved automatically. Now let's enter the information for the order. Since this order is for Joe, I need to enter his customer ID in the customer ID field. Do you remember what number Access assigned for the record that we just entered for Joe? I think it was 1, but we should check to make sure. I'm going to open the customer table. Yep, that's right. Joe has a customer ID of 1. I'm going to close this customer table. I could click on the orders table, but I recommend closing objects when you're not using them. I'll enter 1 for the customer ID. Let's say that Michelle is making this cell. I'll use the date picker to select a date. Note the order ID for this record is 1. I'll need it when I enter the order detail records, which is next. We need 2 order detail records, one for the Thin Mints and one for the Do-si-dos. I'm going to enter 1 for the order ID, since this order detail record goes with the order that we just entered. For item description, I'm going to put Thin Mints, and again, a word of caution is in order. This isn't good database design. I should have a separate table for the different types of cookies offered, and make this a foreign key field, referring back to one of those cookie type records. But as I said before, I'm trying to keep this example simple. For price, I'll enter $4. And I need to enter a separate record for the Do-si-dos. Order ID is still going to be 1 because both of these boxes of cookies go along with the same order for the same customer. There, order complete. And if Joe calls up in a week to order more cookies, I'll create another order record and order detail records for each box of cookies ordered. Since Joe's a returning customer, I wouldn't have to create another customer record though. Along with adding records, you should also be familiar with how to delete records. And while we're deleting records, I can also show you how this enforce referential integrity option works. First, let's try deleting the record I added for Joe Johnson. I'll start by opening the customers table. To delete a record, right-click the left-hand margin for the record and select Delete Record. Yep, that's just what I thought. Access won't allow me to delete this record because there's an existing order record for this customer. If I delete this record, there'll be nothing for the order record to refer back to. If I want to delete this record, I would have to go in and delete all the order records that refer to this customer. Well, let me pick an easier record to delete. I'm going to close the customer table and open the order detail table. Here, let's delete the order detail record for the Thin Mints. There, that was a little easier. I was able to delete this order detail record because no other records referred to it. There is one more concept I want to discuss in this video, and that is design view versus data view. Most objects in Access have both a data view and a design view. When you double-click a table name, it opens the table in data view. In this view, I can enter and edit data. On the Home tab, there's an icon on the left here you can use to switch to design view. In design view, I can make changes to the design of the table. Here, I'll add a comment for one of the fields. Most objects in Access have both a data view and a design view. Data view shows the output or the function of the object. Design view is used to make changes to the definition of the object. Well, that's all for this video. In the next video, I discuss sorting and filtering table data.